Some people might consider this conspiracy, but are we being primed for this end of the world scenario to be fearful of this outer space being that is coming and therefore fight it? It's interesting, there's this obsession with the end of the world, but where does this concept even come from?
Have you guys ever seen some of those end of the world movies?
Yes.
Tons of them.
Armageddon, Ice Age.
Uh-huh. You know, it was always weird to me is they would release almost two at the same time from different studios.
Yep.
I was like, what's the purpose of that? It's like so weird.
It's almost like I wonder if they know that some people are like, priming the pump, but they didn't see that movie. So then they're like,
so they do another one.
I don't know.
Well,
but that is a weird phenomenon.
It's interesting. There's like this obsession with the end of the world, but where does this concept come from? It really comes from the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But not in the way they portray it, because usually it's like the end of the world is coming, but then they're able to fight off whatever comet is coming to the world, the flood, the ice age, the creature that's coming to attack and destroy everybody.
Sometimes
Marvel,
they are.
Transformers. I mean, you just go down the list like...
It's everywhere.
Independence Day.
Star Wars, there's a death planet that's going to destroy the planet. You know what I mean?
So,
it's like they've been working on this for a long time.
I guess you could ask the question, and some people might consider this conspiracy, but are we being primed for this end of the world scenario? But then it's like, are you hearing this so much that basically you're just oh, it's just entertainment. I've heard this so many times. I don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
You cry wolf.
Well, and then you wonder, are these completely original ideas, or are they people taking ideas from the Bible? Because when you take chapters like Matthew 24 and other prophetic chapters,
Daniel
there's a lot of, you could say, geological events
wars, rumors, wars,
that could be,
and,
pretty dramatic for the end of time. So in light of all that, what we did is we said, hey, let's invite a geologist on and talk about that.
Love it. Yeah, what do they think about that?
Geology and end time prophecy. Let's do it.
So we have with us today Ryan Thompson. He is a geologist with a master's in geoscience from Colorado State University. And he's going to talk to us today about this whole idea from film and the Bible and all of this geology. So I think this is going to be very interesting. So welcome, Ryan. It's glad to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Keith, Scotty, and Danique for having me on today. And thank you so much for all that you do and the great content you put out. I'm really excited to get to talk with you guys today about science fiction meeting science reality or potential reality. So thank you.
Awesome.
Have you always done geology or?
Yeah, so I've always loved doing outdoorsy type things, growing up doing nature walks, and then getting into the whole creation evolution debate and realizing the best way to study that was through geology. So I've been on dinosaur digs and fossil fish hunts, and then worked in, as you said, in oil business for like 10 years. And now I teach, though, online, and I teach math and science. So not so much geology. It's more my hobby these days, but definitely studying geology from an end times perspective.
And that's what's very intriguing is most geologists are looking in the past, and you're taking that and you have a totally different spin that I've never heard of, and you do a lot of looking in the future when it comes to geology. So what is this unique perspective that you have?
Yeah, so it is a bit of a unique perspective, and some people might be like, oh, wait a second, evaluating the future geologically. But what we have to remember is that from the creator's perspective, he's seen it all, right? He knows the end from the beginning. So while most creation scientists take the present processes on Earth and they look back at Genesis and a global flood of Noah's day, which, we weren't there to observe, but we can see present geologic processes and begin to understand some of what happened during Noah's day. Okay, my unique perspective is to do the same thing, but as if the future were also history, right? Because it is to God, the creator. And so we can take the record, which is the Bible's last book of Revelation, and evaluate it geologically as well. And for me, being a geologist, when I'm reading it, my neurons are just firing off. I'm going, wow, okay, there's so much geologic stuff in here if we're looking at it from a literal perspective. And so I think the reason for that is because Revelation is really a book about geology. The second most common word in Revelation in the Greek is ge, okay? And that's the root of the word geology, or the study of the earth. So ge in Greek, earth in English, right? The second most common word in Revelation. The first most is theo, or God, right? So Revelation is a book primarily about God and his character, but also about geology. And the central message of Revelation, I believe, is right in the middle of the book in Revelation 14:7, where it talks about the first angel's message, right? Fear God and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. So it's a call back to worship the Creator. And so I believe all the geologic catastrophes and things that are described in Revelation as happening to the earth are all designed to point us back to the Creator in the same way that the geologic events in Genesis and the record there points us to the Creator.
It's like the second book, right? God's second book is nature.
Yeah.
There's so many spiritual truths in the earth that tell us about what's going on here, that God can plop you in the middle. And I mean, that's how he started it out, in a garden, right? Here, tend to this thing. This will teach you about me, you know?
I just think it's so fascinating that, you know, like we just discussed a little bit about the movies and stuff like that. I've never looked at the Bible from a geological perspective before. I mean, that's just not in my brain because I don't deal with that kind of stuff. But it's true, you know, as we were talking about, what is Armageddon, like an ice age, a comet coming toward the Earth, or a meteor. That's literally in Daniel too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to hear from your perspective about, like, you know, as you go into this presentation about the Bible and geology, because now that I'm hearing you talk about this, it seems like there is this priming in this other direction away from the Bible.
How likely are these end time scenarios that the movies are portraying, you know, whether it be this, you know, putting, like, I'm trying to segregate in my mind, like putting the Bible aside a little bit, but like from the picture that people are having painted for them, how likely are these end time scenarios from a geologic perspective?
So from a geologic perspective, I think actually Hollywood has gotten things pretty close to the truth. They've used their imagination, which I think is exactly what we should do when we're looking at these prophecies, is we shouldn't just, well, this has never happened before, therefore it will never happen again, right? That's the trap that the antediluvians fell into at the time of Noah's flood. It's never rained, it'll never rain, and then, you know, the floods came. And so we do want to use our imaginations, but I think that Hollywood takes it a little too far, right? There's a twist. So while they're close to the truth, Hollywood has two goals, right? And one of those is to instill fear. And this is exactly opposite what Jesus wants to do, right? So if you go to Luke 21:26, it says that men's hearts are failing them for fear of what is coming towards the earth. And so that is what Satan wants. He wants us to live in fear of God, right? Not in love and awe of God. And so when you see Hollywood's propaganda that they put out, right, it's all about a fear-based response, right? Suddenly you're looting, rioting, and going off to kill people, and because there's nothing left to live for, an asteroid's going to come and doom us all, so we just revert to our baser animal instincts. Whereas contrast that with what Jesus is saying. He's saying, you know, when you see these things begin to happen, look up, right? So don't react in fear. Keep looking. Look beyond the scary that's coming to what's coming next, right? Because these are just signs of his second coming. And so we should be filled with hope that the King of Kings is coming as a rescue, right? And so the second thing Hollywood does is it's propaganda to condition a certain response, right? And so when we see these things happening, we react, you know, humanity reacts in fear. And then Jesus comes back and we're conditioned by these movies to, you know, save ourselves, right? Humanism, like the Tower of Babel all over again, where we need to, attack whatever is coming down out of the sky and defeat it, right? We're going to go and attack the King of Kings, right? But that's the mentality of these movies, right? Humanity can save itself. And today we're trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to develop commercial space programs now where we can go and colonize Mars, right? It's exactly that same Tower of Babel mentality of saving ourselves so we do not have to be a part of Messiah's kingdom. But man, that's what I'm looking forward to.
So can you give some examples of like recent geologic catastrophes that are, serving as warnings? I think this is a big question in people's mind because people want to automatically ascribe something as from God, like an act of God, an act of judgment. And I do think God allows acts of judgment, or there's another perspective that says, this is all from Satan. Like you read in the book of Job, and then Satan causes things to happen on the earth. What would you use as a modern day or recent example?
Yeah, so this year is the 45th anniversary of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and I think that is a fantastic example of a catastrophic event that really struck at the heart of the theory of evolution, because that eruption actually acted as a catalyst for the modern creation science movement. There's always been creation scientists around who study it from various aspects of creation from a believing faith-based perspective, but it really took off after that catastrophic event in Mount St. Helens, right? Because evolution is based on, again, this idea of millions of years of slow, gradual geologic change, whereas, man, this volcano just erupted in my backyard. How can I believe that the theory of evolution is legit, right? And so I think we're going to see more and more of that happen, like the earthquake in Turkey in February of 2023, in which this massive fracture just ripped across an olive orchard there. And I have a hard time believing that if there were any atheists or evolutionists standing on either side of that rift before it opened, I have a hard time believing that they would actually still believe in slow geologic gradual change after that rift opened. And so then looking at Revelation, right, and you see these even more massive, more spectacular geologic catastrophes coming, it's like, yeah, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to believe in slow gradual change and thus the theory of evolution.
What about, for example, like in light of Keith's question, the Palisades fires, where all these celebrities were living, tons of Christians came out and said, oh, that's an act of God. Like God is punishing those people, which I personally feel like makes God look kind of evil and bad. Mm-hmm. But, from your perspective as a geologist, yeah, is that perhaps, an act of God, or is that actually geologically explained? Even climate change came up in that conversation.
Yeah, so I don't think that the scriptures are telling us that God is an evil God and that he's vengeful and just wants to punish his creation for their wickedness. I think what's going on here is that these signs and plagues are just a natural consequence of the fact that the earth is wearing out. And humanity's lived on it for several thousand years now. It's been violent, chaotic, and we've done a lot of things to destroy our planet. And it's finally reacting to that. And so these are kind of natural consequences. And what's really, really awesome is, again, not a message of fear, but a message of hope, because in each one of these plagues that are coming, there's a matching promise in scriptures specifically for that plague. Every single one of the plagues in Revelation has its own promise of protection. And so an example of that would be when the fourth bowl is poured out and men are cursing God because of the excessive heat from the sun scorching them, right? And then you go to Psalms 121, verses 5 and 6. It says, the Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, right? There's a promise right? And so a promise of protection. And so you have this faith and this assurance that there will be places and times where those who are following God and trusting in God will be preserved from these events that are going on around them. Because at least to start, these events are not global, right? You have wormwood, for example, that only impacts a third of the rivers. That's the third trumpet. The second trumpet, and I think it's only a third of the trees are burned up, right? So they're not global. There is a place of refuge, and there's the promises of provision and safety.
This is very interesting because, we're talking about movies and future geologic events, and yet we see this in Revelation, and we see, there's similarities. And typically when we approach the Bible or things of the Bible, we take a historicist perspective, which we've done many times on this show. It's like when you're interpreting Bible prophecy, like most of those things are rooted in a historical event that has already happened. And there are a few things that are maybe yet future. So how does this type of interpretation work with a historicist approach?
Well, yeah, so we're talking about geologic events happening in the future, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm throwing the historicist approach to interpreting prophecy under the bus, because I really do believe that God has allowed us to interpret prophecy in many different ways in order to, spur hope and revival and a return to Him throughout history. And so you have different ways of interpreting prophecy. You have the spiritual or symbolic, and you have the literal, right? So when I'm looking at geologic events happening in prophecy, I'm looking at a very literal understanding of revelation. And that's in no way to throw out the symbolic or the spiritual, because often those two happen in parallel. And I'll just give you an example of that. The crucifixion of our Messiah, right? Where there was a great conflict going on between the adversary and Jesus. And that is, of course, happening in the spiritual realm. And of course, we know who's victorious there and who rose again. But at the same time that spiritual conflict was reaching its pinnacle, the earth also shook, and there was a massive earthquake, right, that tore the veil in the temple from top to bottom. And so there you have an example of the spiritual and the literal physical happening together, right? And we know prophecy repeats itself. So you have the famous prophecy of Jesus about the destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred in 70 AD, right? He looks at those beautiful, massive stones of the temple, and he's like, there's going to come a time when not one of these stones is found one on top of the other. They're all going to be thrown down. And that happened in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple, and they pushed all those stones off the temple platform. But the platform itself is still there, right? In fact, that's what's called the Western Stone. It's like 250-ton stone, and it's still sitting there in place. It hasn't been thrown down yet. And so we go future into prophecy when the Messiah returns in Zechariah 14 and his feet touch the earth for the first time. The Mount of Olives splits in two. Well, the Mount of Olives is only like less than 2 kilometers away from these massive stones that make up the Western Wall. And so imagine an earthquake that's big enough to split the Mount of Olives is finally going to completely just demolish any man-made structures around there as well. So there's kind of a man-made fulfillment of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem at 70 AD, but then there's also a God event at the end that just, trumps it, right? Ultimate fulfillment of the prophecy.
Revelation is broken up into many different, you could say, pockets of 7. So, for example, you have like the 7 churches and the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls and the 7 seals. These are all different aspects of history, you could say, and they deal with those different aspects of history. And there's crossover between the different eras. So, for example, you have the 7 churches, and that would largely be focusing on events having to do with the church, throughout history. The seven, when you get to things like the seven trumpets and the seven bowls, these are going to be more judgment oriented. It could be talking about, for example, how God's dealing with the human race throughout history and as it relates to judgment. So just, yeah, that's just kind of a like where this is going. It's not like there are necessarily seven bowls that God has that he's like, okay, well in here, we're going to dump this out on the earth. It's symbolic language. And it's how God is dealing with humanity in different periods of history in different ways. It could be through judgment. It could be through the church. It could be military. It could be political. Like they all represent different aspects. So
I think that's kind of like to show where your heart is at. You know, it's like if you think about what happened to Pharaoh, right? Every single time. How many times did he actually have to, okay, that was crazy, this thing that just happened. Okay, I'm sorry, you know, I'll respect God. And it was just like it kept going deeper and deeper. And I think that God is proving to the universe, look at there, you can do all these things that happened to you and you still don't turn around. So all these bowls being poured out, you know, it's like, I think it's like last ditch effort. Like, guys, wake up, you know?
Yeah, so these warning signs are designed to get people into the place of safety and refuge, right? So coming down out of heaven is the New Jerusalem, right? It's like a spaceship in which we can be saved through the catastrophes that are coming. And the parallel would be the ship, the ark, in which Noah's family was saved during the flood. And I'm not the first to kind of draw the parallel between these two things. If you go to 2 Peter and you start in verse 5 and 6, so Peter starts his description of the end times with a reminder of the flood, right? With a reminder of an actual geologic event. So why should we expect the final event to be any different, right? He's setting the context for us, and that's the flood. And then in verse 7, he says that now the ultimate destruction will be fire, right? Even the elements are going to melt with fervent heat. So at some point, these warnings have progressed to the point where, you know, life on earth is inhospitable, right? The very elements are melting. But there's a place of refuge in the New Jerusalem. And outside the New Jerusalem, all the works, and as Peter says in 2 Peter 3:10, all the works are burned up, all the works in creation. So those are what God made is completely burned. And so there's a parallel in the life of every believer, right? And that is baptism. And so baptism is just a Greek word for immersion. We know that the entire world was immersed at the flood. It was completely covered by water. And when Noah and his family got off the ark, they contributed to an earth that was reborn, right? And they repopulated it. And so that is what happens when we are baptized and born again. But then there's also, after that, there's the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes and fills the new believers. And so just like that happens in the believer's life, also the earth is baptized by fire at the end. Okay, this is what Peter is driving towards. This fire that entirely consumes the earth with the exception of what's inside the New Jerusalem, right? And what happens next is that now there can be recreation, right? The earth itself can be made new after that. So reborn after the flood, after baptism, recreated after the Spirit descends, and there's a baptism by fire. And so all hell is what is going on outside of the New Jerusalem. It has a definitive start. It has a definitive end. It doesn't last for very long. And its purpose is just to consume those who decided that they would rather not live a life of love and in harmony with God and their fellow man. And they choose to be outside of the city where there's certain destruction. They have chosen their own fate. That's all hell is a point in time in which there is a destruction by fire, just like the pre-flood world and the inhabitants of it perished, drowned in the flood. That's entirely 100% hell. There is no eternally burning fire because the world has to be recreated after that.
Right.
Yeah.
The verbiage that the Bible uses is the smoke went up forever and ever. And, you know, when you kind of look back at what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah and the smoke is ascending forever and ever, well, we don't see smoke from Sodom and Gomorrah today. So the idea that that is a forever thing just doesn't work.
Yeah, you really have to study when you study the hellfire concept. There seems to be a contradicting statement, because here you have the words forever, and here you have many scriptures that say clearly no, the wicked are burned up. There's ashes under your feet, like you said, Sodom and Gomorrah, it's burned up. So either the Bible contradicts itself or it doesn't, and it's never has. So I want to refer our viewers to a website called helltruth.com, where any of these questions are actually answered from a biblical point of view. And when I first studied this, I was amazed. But that's just a quick reference right there.
If you want a more cinematic movie style story, Hell and Mr. Fudge also is something that dealt with that topic. So.
Yeah, we got a video on our channel as well. Mikey, who used to be here, he did it he discussed hell in the format of Hot Ones. So that's another option. But Ryan, what else do you have on this? You had another thought.
Yeah, so thinking about our theme for today in Hollywood and how it imagines hell, right? And I think I picture Gollum, right, from Lord of the Rings, and he's going down into the fires of Mount Doom. He's going into a lake of fire inside a volcano, clinging to his precious, right, his sins, as it were. And then you've got the Terminator, right? He's choosing to go into a vat of molten metal, right? No one's putting him in there. He's going down with his thumbs up, I'll do it my way, right? And so that's kind of the end of the story, right? But now getting back to the beginning, how do we get there? And so I want to start where Hollywood often starts, with asteroids. And that's a little bit out of my domain, right? Because we're talking about astrophysics now and not geology. But the thing with asteroids is they're mentioned in prophecy, kind of towards the beginning, right? You have the second trumpet, where a asteroid hits the sea. The third, where it hits the rivers. That's the one that's called wormwood. And then you've got the fifth trumpet, where a celestial object impacts the earth and unlocks the bottomless pit and smoke arises, right? And so I think the reason why Hollywood is so obsessed with it is I think the Bible is also obsessed with it. And so Luke especially, actually, if you go to, 3 of the Gospels record Jesus' final prophetic discourse, and Luke really focuses on the celestial events more than the others. And so in Luke 21, verse 26, he's talking about men's heart failing for fear because of things, they're awaiting things arriving to earth, right? Something's coming from space towards the earth. And so these things will have a geologic impact. There will be geologic events associated with not just an impact on the earth, but even a near miss. So if the asteroid just went flying by, it still could have consequences, geologic consequences on Earth. So how does that work, right? So if you have a large gravitational mass like an asteroid, it can actually pull the Earth a little bit closer to it, right? So gravity works both ways, right? So when you dive off a diving board into water, you're moving towards the center of the Earth, but the Earth also very slightly moves towards you, and it does it proportionally, right, to its mass and your mass, okay? If you're talking about a large asteroid mass, it'll have a little bit more of an impact on the Earth. And the idea that there could be a orbital shift isn't necessarily without historical precedent. So Joshua, right, he commands the sun and the moon to stand still. Hezekiah sees a sundial move backwards 15 degrees. And we know that at the time of the flood, it's recorded in Genesis for us, that the rains fell for 150 days, but it's also told us that that period was also 5 months. And so we know that at one point in the past, the Earth's orbit was closer to the sun, and we were on a 360-day-year calendar. not 365 like it is today. And so an orbital slip, I think, has occurred in the past, and it's, I think, possible that it could in the future. Now, this is a hypothesis. It's kind of wild speculation, but that's what prophetic interpretation is, right? We need to be careful not to hold our prophetic interpretations too closely, because at the end of the day, interpretation is just a nice word for speculation, and hypothesis is just a nice word for speculation. And so we can come up with these different ideas and test them and see which one fits the best. But we got to live it. We got to wait to see it happen, right? To really know for sure. So the idea I'm going to throw out there is that asteroids can cause the Earth's orbit to slip, and that when they do so, it causes geologic events to occur on Earth. Okay? And I'm going to go so far as to say that I think the Bible is actually point blank telling us that this is what happens.
Do you remember that earthquake that happened in Indonesia? Or it hit Indonesia. I guess the tsunami hit Indonesia. Mm-hmm. The earthquake hit the whole Earth. It was like a 9.2 magnitude or something. It was at around 2005, 6, 2004. Yeah. I thought I remember reading that had shifted the Earth somehow as well.
Yeah, so that was actually 2004 when that tsunami hit, and it was caused by an earthquake on a convergent plate tectonic boundary. And when you move masses around, right? If you say you have a spinning top, and you move the mass around, it's going to change how that top spins, and that's exactly what happens with the Earth. So it's entirely possible.
How in the world, no pun intended, would you measure that?
Good question for him.
I mean, that's like such a crazy thing. Like, like this massive ball. How would you even know if it went like a degree? You know what I mean? Or like, off course. Yeah. That's an
Maybe
interesting
Ryan
thought,
can
though.
tell us.
Yeah.
How you would see it is you would just observe a change in the length of days in a year or days in a month, right? So I think it's possible that God could put us back on that calendar where it's 360 days per year. And that obviously we would notice.
Yeah, summer or winter's happening at a different kind of space than it used to or something,
Yeah, so Isaiah 13:13 then says, "Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place." And there's a couple interesting Hebrew words in there that just like really pop to me as a geologist. And the first one is, I'm going to probably pronounce it horribly, memakoma. It's one Hebrew word, but from it we get the idea that the earth is being moved out of its usual place. Okay, and then it says that the heavens are shaken, and there the Hebrew word is regaz. Clearly not an earthquake, right? Because the heavens are what is shaken. So what is this, right? The heavens are shaken and the earth is no longer in the same place. That's a little odd to contemplate. So the Hebrew language is really, really rich when it comes to words that have to do with shaking. Unfortunately, in the English, they're all translated as shaking. But you got to remember that the Holy Land sits on a plate boundary between the Arabian plate and the African plate, and those are moving apart, which is why the Dead Sea is so deep and dropping down where it is. It's dropping down along these faults as these two plates move apart. And so they've got lots of words to describe shaking in all its different ways that the earth moves and shakes. So let's go to Isaiah 24 for another couple Hebrew words about shaking. And it says there that the foundations of the earth shake, okay? The earth is violently broken and the earth is split open. The earth slips completely. And I've put in my own translation there. Most of the translations, this is Isaiah 24, 18, 19, say the earth is utterly shaken, okay? But I say the earth slips completely because in Hebrew it's mot, all right? And when we find a Hebrew word repeated more than once, it means it's doing it to completion or doing it perfectly, right? So shalom, shalom is peace, peace, or perfect peace. And why do I say slip? Well, I say slip because if you go to Psalm 17, verse 5, the psalmist is saying, uphold me, O God, and preserve me that my foot doesn't slip. Okay, so there it's actually translated as slip. Here it's translated as shaking, because how does the earth slip, right? No one can conceive of that. Well, I can. I'm a geologist, right? And so the earth, if it was slip, slipping is a great descriptor of what happens between faults, right? You have a plate boundary, or even like the San Andreas fault, and it's one block of rock is moving or sliding or slipping past the other one, right? But here it says the entire earth is doing that. And then if you say where it says the foundations of the earth are shaken, a better word for that is probably leap, okay? That's the Hebrew word ra'ash, and it's used in Job 39, verse 20, where it says a locust ra'ash from one place to another, right? So the locust will leap from one place to another. And it's in one place, and then suddenly it's in another place, okay? And it slips between the two places. That's what it's telling us. So how does the foundations of the earth do that? Obviously, in Job, it also tells us that the earth is hung on nothing. We're not talking about literal foundations here. But what could it slip on? And the answer is, well, it could be slipping on the fabric of space-time, on the fabric of gravity, right? The orbit of the earth is shifting once again, and potentially shifting closer to the sun, right? And why I say closer to the sun is because of how that would impact then certain geologic things happening on Earth that are described in Revelation. I think I'm going on too much, and so just let me know if I need any questions.
No, we're tracking with you. It's
Yeah,
fascinating. You're going in teacher mode, and we're just like soaking it up.
Yeah.
So what happens when you have a crust that is warming up? What happens to things as they get
Gonna
warmer?
get hotter.
Expand.
They expand.
Right. They expand. Things expand when they get warmer. So how does that drive an increase in earthquakes? And the answer to that is, so today, right, the Earth's crust is colder and the fault planes are being squeezed together. The Earth is in compression, not expansion, right? Not extension. And so as these faults are being pushed together, it's actually acting as a dampening effect on the number of earthquakes. And we still have major catastrophic earthquakes, but nothing compared to what would happen if the Earth were just a little bit closer to the sun. We would have an exponential rise in the number of earthquakes, the severity of earthquakes, and they would be happening in diverse places where they haven't happened before. As those fault planes are, the stresses on those fault loosen, right? As the crust expands, it loosens those faults, and then they can just start slipping easily all over the place. And so that is how a slight adjustment, very slight adjustment to Earth's orbit could end up kickstarting the geologic changes that go on and are described in the book of Revelation, right? The increase in earthquakes. And so along with then the earthquakes starting to slip more, right? When you have the expansion, you're also going to open up fractures in the earth. And those fractures are conduits for the magma under the crust of the earth to come up through the crust and erupt out as volcanoes, right? So not only do you have earthquakes, but you also have a tremendous increase in volcanic activity and volcanic material being ejected into the atmosphere, as well as lava flowing out over the surface of the earth.
And if you have a lot of volcanic activity, then you're going to create a lot of ash and soot and things like that. So it would have a lot of these things that, people have talked about from an evolutionary perspective. This asteroid hit the earth and these volcanoes went off and it created this cloud of darkness. So things like that.
Keith, yes, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's exactly what is described then, right? In some of the later bowls and trumpets after the initial asteroid impacts, you have darkness, and the darkness is described as painful darkness, right? This isn't just darkness caused by an eclipse. There's something in that darkness, and I think that something is the glass from a volcanic eruption, right? The little shards of particles in the volcanic ash, and this is paralleled, right, back to the plagues of Exodus again, where the darkness was thick and gloomy, and the Egyptians actually had to feel through it, right? Well, why do you have to feel through darkness? Because there's stuff in the darkness, right? Ash in the darkness. Very much like what was experienced after Mount St. Helens again erupted and just blanketed the Pacific Northwest with a layer of ash and gloomy darkness that lasted for days, just as what's talked about in these plague events.
So I'm just curious, like, we see all of these catastrophes in movies. We see like the floods, like the meteors, like you guys are talking about. How likely is it for humans to be able to ward this off? Because like we've talked in the beginning, it seems like we're kind of being, what do you call it? Like taught, so to speak, that this is coming, but
It's inevitable.
Yeah, it's inevitable, but you can fight this back. So I'll give you an example. Ice Age, for example. I keep bringing up this one because it's the most vivid in my mind, that there's this meteor that came, but they basically go into a volcano, like you just mentioned. They take these crystals from this volcanic geyser, and they work together to hurl a giant crystal into the volcano, triggering an eruption, and then eruption sends the magnetic crystal shards into the sky, creating a magnetic force field that deflects the asteroid, sending it back into space from Earth. And then you have this other one, we talked about Armageddon. I remember seeing this as a kid, where they drill a nuclear weapon into the core of the, and it detonated, and so it splits into two, and basically diverts from Earth's trajectory. So
that sounded a lot more plausible than the Ice Age one.
yes, but you know, like, just to bring this up, like, is it even humanly possible, as it's portrayed in the movies, to divert an asteroid, to stop a flood? Because when I look at, for example, the Palisades fires, I'm like, that thing just took all the houses out, including of all of these famous people, celebrities, movie stars. They couldn't do a thing about it. I mean, they were trying and they just couldn't stop it.
Yeah, you know, Hollywood, I think, is, again, trying to condition us for a specific response. And so we see an asteroid coming towards Earth, and we're not sure if it's going to hit Earth. It's, you know, we think it will based on, you know, our calculations. And so what do? Like you said, we send a nuke up, or we blow it up, and could be creating our own problems, right? When suddenly now, instead of one asteroid that God knew was going to miss, now suddenly we've got three, the second trumpet, the third trumpet, the fifth trumpet, right? We've got all these fragments that are definitely going to hit Earth now, right? Humans cannot control the power of nature. I think that's very clear, and what's really awesome is that our God, the Creator, can, right? Thinking about Sinai, and the fact that you have this amazing geologic event going on at Sinai, right? The thunder, the mountain melting, and yet God's voice is heard above that, right? Our Creator has power over His creation. We definitely don't.
You know, you're bringing up an interesting point that I've actually never thought of, because I've always watched those movies way back when, too. Stopped watching movies years ago, but I always thought that's ridiculous. I know that's not how the world is going to end.
Yeah.
But how many times does Satan come at us with a full, absolute lie that has nothing to do with the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's close to the truth,
yes,
you see how much more effective that is. So that's kind of an interesting concept that you're bringing up, that there might be some elements that could easily play into this. Not that it's just like, oh, absolutely nothing could even come close.
But then we do have the concept in the movies as well of this.
We stop it.
Well, I was going to say this absolute chaos and fear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we are being primed to be fearful of this thing that's coming, and therefore fight it. But the Bible explains, Ryan, that we actually, there's a hope, and that we can be seek comfort and see this as a signs of the times that our Savior's coming to save us from this earth. So what are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
You're absolutely right, Danique, and there is hope. That hope is the fact that the second coming of Jesus is a rescue mission. And it's a rescue mission because Earth is going to get to the point where life on this planet actually becomes unsustainable. And so, winding up to this grand culmination, this grand crescendo of the final lake of fire, right? All these geologic events, actually, they reverse every single day of creation in its entirety, right? And so in Jeremiah 4:25, it uses the same Hebrew word tohu wabohu as we find in Genesis to describe the earth in its pre-created state. Only Jeremiah is talking about it in the future, right? And it's the abyss. It's translated, that same Hebrew word in the Greek is abyss, and that's what we see in Revelation, right? And in Jeremiah 4:25 says there's no man. So we see an undoing of day 6 of creation and the creation of man. And then as far as day 5, right, in Jeremiah, it talks about all the birds having fled. We know that all the sea creatures die in Revelation 16, verse 3. And so day 5 is fully reversed. The sun, moon, and stars are darkened over and over again in prophecy. That's the reversal of day 4, where those heavenly luminaries were unveiled. The grass is burned up in Revelation 8 verse 7. And the grass being burned up, right? That's a reversal of day 3, but it's more than that, right? Because you have the mountains and islands collapsing into the sea. And so that, remember how God on the third day of creation gathered the land together and separated it from the waters. So that's a tectonic process there, and powered by the Creator's voice, right? And so you see a reversal of that. So all these earthquakes that we're talking about that are kind of kick-started by this orbital shift, they increase in intensity to the point where mountains and islands are collapsing. And they continue, right? The volcanism continues all the way up to the final lake of fire. So, okay, that's day 3. And then 2 Peter 3:10, we've already talked about that, right? Where the elements are melting with fervent heat. So obviously the atmosphere that was created on day 2, entirely burned up. Isaiah 34 says, verse 4, that the sky is rolled up like a scroll. Okay, it's gone. And at that very moment when we can't even breathe anymore, that's when Jesus returns to rescue us, right? Ultimately, even day 1 is reversed. Jeremiah 4:23 says that there is no light anymore. Okay, and so what's going on here, right? We have this massive earthquake that's talked about in the 6th seal, the 7th trumpet, and the 7th bowl. And Ezekiel 34:12 says that the sheep are rescued on a cloudy and dark day, which is exactly that thick clouds and dark gloominess that we're talking about, and that volcanic ash, right? And Jesus is coming back, John 12:47, not to judge the world, but to save or rescue the world, right? That was his mission the first time. That's his mission coming again.
Ryan, you're blowing my mind. That is a chiastic structure if I've ever seen one.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Almost like the entire world is mimicking the structure that God had, wow, I've never thought of that before. That's amazing.
But you know what's even more fascinating when you think about that, what are the implications of that? If the earth is brought to a place where even people now believe that the earth is going to be unsustainable, they just see it as in the future, way on out. Eventually it's going to happen because of global warming and all these other things. But if you bring the earth to a place where it's unsustainable and you're on the earth, you should realize you got two options. You can keep fighting against it, or you can recognize Jesus as your Lord and Savior and as your only source of hope to get out of that mess.
I think
How galvanized would you have to be?
I think God is very merciful. And I think, I like the fact that you brought up Noah. Those people were making fun of Noah all the way up to the second they started seeing the raindrops. Then it was like trying to fasten themselves to the sides and, you know, all sorts of stuff, right? I think that God, what happens when he often passes these judgments, it's like getting punished as a child, right? That should correct what you're doing. But if you are defiant, then that pretty much shows the universe you're not going to turn around.
And in the plagues, when you look at those, it's easy to look at them, you know, as pretty harsh. But every step of the way, there's mercy that God is offering to people. And so it's like, okay, now I just destroyed this thing, and it's going to make it hard, but there's this crop over here that's still preserved that, you know, is in the process of springing up, and you'll have food. You know, the call is to turn to me now, and they harden their hearts, and you know, Pharaoh does. He turns away from that, and then the next thing is destroyed. And it's like, well, I still have a plan. I can still help you. I can still save you, but you need to turn to me. And I see that what he's describing is the same thing is happening.
Yeah, and if you're seeing those people that are truly on God's side protected, that's another act of mercy for you to look.
Yeah.
Why are you not experiencing this, what I'm experiencing? Why is this thing skipping over you? Which should ultimately make you go, what's going on here? Like, let's talk about this.
Yes.
And that's God's mercy.
And this is why it's so important that we're in the Bible and not into pop culture. Ironically, you're wearing real eyes. I'm wearing, let me show you. What would Jesus watch? And then Keith's also wearing one of the prophecy shirts. Yes, but you know, we got plenty of t-shirts like that on lightwear.shop. So if you want to spread the message, get in the word, not in the media.
These are conversation starters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was walking through the airport and I walked right by one of those kind of like bars that are out there. Dude, the bartender goes, "Nice shirt."
Yeah.
And so I walk over and I have this whole conversation from him, and it's like, that's a good reason to wear the truth right on your chest.
Let's
right?
share the message. Get in the word, not in the what we've got one that says the Facebook logo, and it's like get your face in the
Get your
Lamb's
face in the
book.
book. Yeah.
In the
Get your
Lamb's
face in the
book.
right book.
Yeah.
So obviously, depending on your perspective, this looks pretty grim, but we see a lot of hope. And I see like it makes it more real in my mind that if all these things are being, you know, creation in reverse, and God's people obviously needing to be protected, when God says your bread and water will be sure, that has to be a supernatural event, because you can't provide for yourself anymore. There's no way to do that.
There's no crops. The crops are gone.
Yeah, completely dependent upon God. So there's nothing that you're doing essentially to provide for your salvation. You're just cooperating with God's plan and saying, okay, Lord, I'm here.
Even more miraculous when all those resources are taken away and God's people are still fed. That
Like
is
he's just
another
saying,
reason to be on the right side.
Dead fish, dead birds, and dead grass. Where are you going to get it from? Well, God provides.
Yeah.
What are I mean, thinking about this, God's purpose is to save the world, not to judge the world. You know, the Bible even says in John 3:16, I did not come, well, it's not 3:16, but 3:17, I did not come to condemn the world, right? That's not the purpose of his coming. And then we're going to be eventually removed, you know, just like he talked about in the beginning, that recolonization. Only it's God's colonization program where we go to the new Jerusalem, not Mars. And then we're back to where we started, right, Ryan?
Right, except for the sin problem.
Yeah, without the sin part.
That's true. But that's even more amazing. There's a chiastic right there. You get into the sin. In the end, the world is reversed, destroyed, and you have the sin problem solved.
And then what happens, because it's not completely done after that. I mean, we go to the New Jerusalem, but there's one more geological event, you might say, that's happening. Walk us through that.
Yeah, one last geologic event where, you know, Revelation 21:1, now there's a new heavens and a new earth. right? We get to see recreation, right? We get to see that hellscape converted back into paradise. That'd be
Wow.
awesome.
Right.
So I have a cool rock question for you. Were you a little kid that like just put rocks in your pockets? And your parents would do the washing machine and there'd be like just rocks roaming around in there?
I definitely was the kid that started collecting rocks, and I would line them up next to my baseboard. Don't know that they ever really made it into my pockets, though. I just wanted to see them.
Why is gold transparent? How is that even possible?
Well, if you get it thin
In the
enough,
New Jerusalem.
then it would be
Yeah, you get it
transparent.
thin enough.
Well, then if it's thin enough to see through, isn't it? It's not really there.
It's pretty thin. No, it's just super thin. So gold, from a chemistry perspective, I remember it's the most malleable. So you can take an ounce of
Flatten it
gold
out.
and hammer it out to the size of a tennis court.
Wow.
So yeah, it's got some crazy properties as an element.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Man, I'm looking forward to it. A city with 12 foundations of different cool stones, you know? It's
Yep.
like heaven's going to be this just like absolutely. And I like how the Bible describes that too. City Jerusalem with the gates and the pearls. And I mean, there's just like,
It's gonna be awesome.
it'll be awesome. Don't miss out.
Noah made his ark out of wood, and God is making his place of refuge out of gold and jewels. It's gonna be awesome.
So that's a pretty interesting picture, and definitely different than one that Hollywood has painted for us. Certainly the one that we have has a lot more hope than what Hollywood is giving. So thank you for sharing that. It's been very educational, to say the least, and I think just reinforces how much hope that the Bible is actually offering. And so if you, as a viewer, want to know more about these things, Ryan has actually written a book. And you can get that on Amazon. You can leave a review there. So we'll put a link in the description below so that you can pick that up and support his work and also learn more about this perspective. Any closing thoughts from anybody?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Keith and Scotty and Danique, for such a wonderful time today. It just got me all fired up all over again. Thank you.
No, that was really fascinating. I love it. Just the study of nature and then the conjunction with the Bible. I just think that the Word is such an amazing book. I mean, it's just so rich and deep, and you know, there's a reason why God just says dig deep into this thing, because you will understand and will forever study that thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that to me is amazing. I mean, what are you going to do 1 billion years down the road?
Yeah.
And you're still going to be like mind blown, like, no way, that was amazing.
Yeah. I'm a Scotty. Get your head in the Lamb's book, God's word. And I think we all have gained a different perspective now of the Bible from a geological point of view. And let's spend time in God's word and away from this media that really deceives us and turns us away from Jesus. Let's turn toward Jesus.